Researchers have developed an AI technology to help analyze economic conditions in countries like North Korea, where data is scarce, simply using satellite imagery. So how does this AI technology work? What has been learned about North Korea's economic conditions? And how accurate is the AI-based assessment? Hello and welcome. It's Thursday here in Korea and you're watching Issues and Insiders. Now today, we touch upon the efforts based on artificial intelligence aimed at better assessing, among other things, the state of North Korea's economy. For this, I have Professor Kim Jihee from KAIST here in the studio. Professor Kim, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Jacco Zwetsloot with us. Jacco, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Hello, welcome. Thank you for welcoming me back.
Right. Professor Kim, we'll start off then with some details, background details that is, regarding the launch of your joint research.
So my fellow economists and I found this pioneering research in 2016, that came out in 2016, that studied, tried to predict the wealth level of African villages using daytime satellite images and machine learning. So what they did is basically they teach machines like AI model that like showing these villages in satellite images. They also tell the machines that in these villages, this village has like, in this village, the average household owns like $5,000 worth of assets. And for this village, looks like this, they have like $6,000 average household asset, like blah, blah, blah. So like, they train the models with these many data points. And once they are all trained, what they can do is just, if you give them satellite images, the models can tell you how much household average asset the villagers own. So we thought, it's great, it's amazing. Why don't we apply this technology to North Korea? So that's how it started. And what's appealing about this using machine learning and satellite images, what's appealing about this approach is that first, it can help measure a nation with a very high spatial resolution. So in this case, it's village level, but as I explain later, we went a little bit higher resolution. But it's great. I mean, it's also at the same time covering entire nation. So it's great in that regard. And secondly, it can be as frequent as we have satellite images. So basically, it can be annual, it can be quarterly. Technically, it can be monthly or daily as long as we have satellite images. So it's another great point. And the last one is the cost. So it could be relatively cheap. If you think about all the financial and time resources that we are putting into census surveys, it's relatively cheap way to have some economic measurement. So we're really excited. This is great. This is a great way to uncover North Korean economy. But then we're excited, but at the time we were very naive to think that we can just apply any existing machine learning models to the North Korean satellite images and just do the thing that the earlier researchers have done for African countries. But then maybe you might have guessed, but the challenge is that those existing machine learning models, they require data to begin with. Because the machines, they need to be trained first with some economic measurements that have been already done, which for North Korea, we don't have. So this means that we needed to develop a new technology that's tailored toward these North Korean cases with the data scarceness. So in 2019, we created this interdisciplinary team, including economists like me, and a big team of computer scientists led by Professor Arirang at KAIST, and also geographers, to develop an AI model that uses satellite images to uncover North Korean economy.
Right, so it's like a collaborative effort by a number of experts in different fields then. And Jacco, before we delve further into Professor Kim's research, for the sake of some perspective, could you share with us the little that is known about North Korea's economy?
Yes, as we just heard from Professor Kim, the problem with North Korean economy is getting data out about it. North Korea doesn't release accurate statistics, and we don't have a lot of outside observers going in there and looking around. So a lot of what we know about the North Korean economy, we have to estimate by using mirror statistics, such as, for example, exports to North Korea or imports from North Korea that are going to China or to Russia. Now, North Korea's economy is still one where the government has a great deal of control and planning. And over the last 3 decades, since the famine of the 1990s, the government has allowed a certain low level of market-based activities. So, for example, permitting a farmer to sell surplus vegetables at a local market, for example. But it's never fully embraced the kind of economic reforms that China and Vietnam have over the years. And this has been a deliberate choice by the government in Pyongyang, probably because it fears that losing control of the economy could also mean losing control of the people if capitalism takes too much root there. So at the end of last year, for example, North Korea claimed in its Central Party plenum that the economy had grown by 40% over 3 years since 2020, but it didn't give statistics for the size of the economy before or after that 3-year growth period. So it's very hard to say whether or not this is accurate. We don't have any data to make an accurate judgment on what that 40% growth means. Now, according to Dr. Peter Ward, writing for NK Pro, the economy of North Korea is divided into 3 parts effectively. One part controlled by the cabinet, another part controlled by the Central Party, and another part controlled by the military. Now, we don't even know whether all the statistics that the North Korean government puts out, such as that 40% growth figure, whether that includes all of those 3 areas. So that's very tough. The South Korea Bank of Korea has its own statistics. It makes its own estimates about growth of the North Korean economy, and it has actually said that it shrank for 3 years until 2022, rather than growing anywhere near 40%. So we really have such a difficult basis to go on to make any kind of assessment about the North Korean economy. So
Right.
I'm interested to hear more about Professor Kim's research.
Right, me too. So against this backdrop of uncertainty with regard to North Korea's economic conditions, Professor Kim, how does your research model, based on AI, help to better analyze the conditions there?
Let me first start with explaining a little bit of the technical details of our model. So first, the unit of analysis in our model is 6 square kilometer grid. So for every 6 kilometer grid, that's like 2.5 kilometer, and 2.5 kilometer, that's like 6 square kilometer. For every grid, we'll have measurement. So that's the size of each satellite image. So for each image, we'll have some number. So this is like very high resolution, right? But this resolution is limited. It's relatively high, but it could be low. But this resolution is limited by the resolution of the satellite image, publicly available satellite images. So we use publicly available satellite images, not just because it's cheap, it's free, but also because it's cheap, it's more scalable, it's generalizable, and it's also accessible to anyone who is interested in the technology. So that's why we chose publicly available images. And at this resolution, for the entire North Korea, there are, for 1 time snapshot, we have like about 30,000 satellite images or satellite image grids. So that's what we're talking about. And second of all, the goal of our model is to measure relative economic development, the relative level of economic development in each grid in one nation. So we went for relative level instead of going for absolute level, like population density or income per capita, because as you might have guessed, we don't have data, because there's no way we can kind of like use, because we need data to train the model. But once we don't have the data, we cannot train, and we cannot really predict those numbers. So that's why we went for relative level of economic development. Okay. So having said these two, so I'm gonna explain how our model works. So our model works in 3 steps. So in the first step, is where we give machines all the images, like 30,000 images per year, per time. We give all the images to machine. And what machine does is they group these satellite images into some number of image groups, clusters. So that in each cluster, the images look pretty similar. In other words, the images are pretty much very homogeneous in each cluster. So for example, in one cluster, it can contain images of the area that's like highly populated, like high density urban area, or in another cluster, it could be less populated, but still urban. And then if you can go to the urban, rural clusters, then this one cluster can contain very large scale farmland, very organized. Like you can think that they could be efficiently managed. Or in another cluster, it's like small scale farmland, like the irregular shapes. I mean, you can like kind of expect these different farmlands have different levels of economic development. So the machines, they do amazing job, like clustering out these images. For the case of North Korea, we had like 23 clusters, and for South, we tried our model for South Korea, we had like 21 clusters. Anyway, so in the first step is the clustering, and once clustering is done, we go to the second step. The step 2 is where we have the high novelty in the model there. In step 2 is where humans come in to give the data or create data to train the model. It's where what we do is we ask people who are familiar with this nation. For the case of North Korea, it's North Korean defectors. So we ask North Korean defectors to visually examine these 23 clusters to sort them in the order of economic development. So it's just the 23 clusters. We ask North Korean defectors to order them in the order of economic development they think. I mean, it's just a visual inspection, but still. So this is where humans come in. So we call it partial order graph. I mean, it's a technical term. This is what machines will learn. And it's a very efficient and cheap way once you think about the alternative. The alternative, I told you that for North Korea, it's 30,000 images. To train these type of images, we need at least 5,000 images. Have to have some numbers that are tagged into these images, like at least 5,000. It could be like 10,000 or like 20,000. So compared to labeling all these images with the level of economic development, just ordering 23 clusters, it's relatively easy way and cheap way. For our case of North Korean defectors, it typically took 1 to 2 hours. So it's relatively very lightweight. So then using these ordering that's given by the humans, we move into the final step. So final step is where the machines learn. So machines learn to rank every image that we give them, to rank in a way that preserve the orders that's given by the humans in the previous step. So they just spit out the numbers for each grid that'll be consistent manner with the ordering that the humans gave us. So after all, so we have a great map of North Korea with numbers for every numbers that represents the level of economic development for each 6 square kilometer grid. So that's kind of like the description of how our model works.
Right. So let me see if I get this straight. The first you put in the data about the images.
Images.
Which is you have 30,000 images of North Korea in a year.
Yes.
The image is put into the machine,
yes.
so to speak.
Yes.
And then the machine or the AI sorts them out into clusters.
Yes.
And for North Korea, you came up with 23 clusters.
23 clusters.
And then you asked North Korean defectors to arrange the clusters, the 23 clusters, into order of economic development.
Yes.
And then the machine is asked to predict or to assess, that is, the economic conditions depending on the clusters.
Depending on the order that's
of the clusters.
Order of the clusters, yes.
I see. All right. Well, before we get into details of what you found, then we're talking about AI, Jacco. This is just a break from Professor Kim's research, but I understand the developments or advances of in AI by North Korea also is causing quite a bit of concern, and this was shared by Reuters recently.
Yes, Hyuk Kim at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, he did a research study that Reuters reported on, and that research study is actually published in its entirety on the website 38 North. Now, I can't do full justice to Hyok Kim's research by summarizing it in a few seconds, but basically the report it's full of details and examples. The bottom line is that Mr. Kim assesses that North Korea is making a strategic investment into artificial intelligence and machine learning with the goal of boosting its digital economy. So in the study, Mr. Hyok Kim wrote that the promotion of AI extends throughout academia in North Korea, which is evidenced by the fact that some high schools in North Korea are even teaching AI programs to their students. And North Korean researchers are collaborating with foreign scholars, mostly from China, which is also a concern because sanctions are supposed to stop that kind of dual-use technology sharing and transfer. So Hyok Kim recommends that national governments should be more proactive, first of all, in warding off potential North Korean attacks using AI or machine learning by collaborating with cloud-based companies to increase the level of security, and also by dissuading scholars from working together with North Korean AI researchers on developing technology that could ultimately be used in aggressive and even military ways. Now, at the same time, South Korea's National Intelligence Service recently said that it has detected hackers from North Korea using AI to find new targets for possible hacking, but there's no evidence yet that this technology has been actually used for a large-scale cyber attack. So it's something that they're continuing to monitor.
Right, indeed it is. Now, Professor Kim, our Jacco just talked about sanctions. Now, regardless of the presence of sanctions, North Korea is also experimenting with AI. I understand that you use your technology to better assess North Korea's economic conditions by comparing the situation there in North Korea before and after UN sanctions in the years 2016 and 2019.
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit more?
Yes, so we analyzed the changes in our numbers between 2016 and 2019. So we picked these two numbers because the UN sanctions against North Korea became really intense starting from 2017 and 18. So we hope to kind of like measure the impact of these sanctions over the North Korean economy by analyzing the changes. There are two main findings. So over the years of the sanctions, the first, the development was more focused on Pyongyang and other urban areas than the rural areas, increasing the gap between the urban-rural economic development level. And the second one is among the 4 different economic development zones that the country is promoting, we were able to spot some development activities in agricultural and tourism development zones, but not in export processing and industrial development zones. So from this, what we can see is how North Korea responded to the UN sanctions in the perspective of how they allocate those resources for economic development when it's really constrained, when the economy is really constrained.
I see. Simply speaking, Professor Kim, what did your research find out about North Korea's economy?
So like if you just look at like one snapshot of our numbers, I mean, we can see something that can be easily expected. I mean, like in the Pyongyang, every development was focused in Pyongyang and other like major cities, like port cities, like the border cities, and except that the others are all just like very underdeveloped.
Right, I see. And Jacco, for the sake of perspective again, could you tell us a bit about the sanctions that Professor Kim mentioned back in 2016, very briefly?
Yeah, in January 2016, North Korea tested its 4th nuclear device at Punggye-ri. Now, North Korea claimed that this was a hydrogen bomb, but many experts questioned that. Nevertheless, the test itself led to widespread global condemnation and United Nations Security Council Resolution 2270. And this resolution put into place very, very broad and comprehensive sanctions. Until then, the sanctions had either targeted the leadership by blocking the import of luxury goods into North Korea, or they targeted the weapons of mass destruction program itself. But the 2016 sanctions really hit North Korean economy hard in foreign trade, in financial transactions, and in transport. And at this time, global NGOs and international aid and development organizations that had been doing work in North Korea began to suffer difficulties because they were unable to bring in money, for example, to pay for things on the ground. And there was a later Security Council resolution in November 2016, number 2321, which put into place more sanctions that banned the export of minerals and the import of helicopters and other items. And then in August, September and December of the following year, 2017, 3 more sets of sanctions were put into place that, if they were fully implemented and enforced, would have shut down large parts of the North Korean economy except for sort of basic subsistence activities. So the effects of all these sanctions is to make North Korea more internally self-reliant, as well as more reliant on inputs from friendly nations that are not publicly declared.
Right. And now, Professor Kim, back again onto your research. So essentially, you are combining human input with AI predictions for areas where data is quite scarce. How, I understand it's too early to tell, but how accurate would you say is your assessment?
It's pretty impressive. The model performs really well without the true data set. So let me elaborate a little bit more. To evaluate its accuracy, again, we need data. So we need data that we'll think of as the true measurement of economic development. So the example of that could be population density or the building volume that each grid is occupied with. So that could be a good proxy measures. For South Korea, we do have those data. So when we evaluated our model in South Korea, our measurement scores and those population density and the building volume, the correlations were more than 85%, which is very impressive. But for North Korea, we don't have that data luxury. But we did have, not perfect, but we did have some measure that we can evaluate our measurement scores as thanks to the researchers who studied North Korea for a very long time. We have some data set that we can use. So one of them is the land cover classification map of North Korea. It's manually constructed by researchers in South Korea. So using this map, what we can do is we can calculate not the building volume, but the building area. We don't have the height data, but the building area data, we call it built up area data. It's not perfect, but it's a good enough proxy for North Korea. So when we compared our measures to this built-up area, the correlations were more than 75%. So which is, again, aligns with the state-of-the-art, cutting-edge level technology.
I see. And very briefly speaking, Professor Kim, could you tell us about the broader implications of your research? We have like about 30 seconds.
Okay. So we think we have great potential to extend our application of technology beyond North Korea. I think it's especially useful for underdeveloped countries or developing countries who lack resources to any serious economic surveys or have any economic measurement at this higher resolution.
And perhaps providing other pundits with ways to better tackle problems in areas where data is scarce. All right, Professor Kim, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. And Jacco, thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you, as always, for watching, and see you same time on Friday.